Okay, this is going to be a very quick video on the history of the universe and why I'm an atheist. Okay, so I've got Wikipedia here. Right, the age of the universe is 13.75 billion, so Carl Sagan billion years old. That's an American billion, so you know in the UK you'd say it's 1,000 million years old. Whichever way you want to say it, it's a lot of time. Okay, it's 13.75 times 10 to the power of 9 years old. That's a lot of years. In quite a lot of that time, nothing happened concerning us because we didn't exist yet for pretty much all of that time almost. The universe is also really big spatially as well as in time. We can only see 13.75 billion light years away, because anything that's further away than that, the light hasn't actually had long enough in the universe's existence. It hasn't had enough time to get to us from further away, because light only travels at the speed of light. So the universe is, say, 13.75 billion years old, and we can only see 13.75 billion light years away, and we can see things there. So it seems quite likely that it's even bigger than that, but we can only see up to our own horizon, as it were, which doesn't mean we're at the centre of the universe. As far as we know, Earth's it's the third from the sun. Our particular star is nothing. There's nothing that really that's special about it, given the many other stars in our galaxy, and our galaxy isn't really that special in the universe. Everything about us says, we're just a pretty uneventful planet in the middle of nowhere. We can tell from observing the universe, things like the Doppler shift. We can tell how big the universe is, how old it is, that kind of thing. This is really interesting as well, and it's not as complex as people seem to imagine it might be. You know how like an ambulance or a police car or a fire engine goes past and you hear that it goes down in pitch as it goes past you, because the waves are kind of bunching up on the way to you and expanding out on the way when they're going away from you, because the sound is physically moving, but it's physically moving plus the speed of the ambulance on its way towards you, but minus the speed of the ambulance on its way from you. That's why it appears to go down in pitch as it zooms past, even though it's not. Using the exact same technique, the colour of things appears to change. As they move towards you, they're a little bit blue. As they move away, they're a little bit red, and that's what the red shift is. If you ever hear astronomers talk about that, it's just the Doppler shift, the exact same principle as when an ambulance drives past. Spectroscopy is another interesting thing. You can get a prism and shine a white light into it, and lots of different colours come out. The thing is, not all of the colours will come out, because some might be absorbed by something else in the way. If you've got the sunlight directly coming into you, you're going to see all the colours of the spectrum. If there's something in between, like a cloud or a glass window, it's going to be blocking some of the colours, but not all of them. And depending on which colours are blocked and which ones aren't, you can tell which it's either atoms or molecules. I think it's atoms. Yeah, which elements from the periodic table. You can see which ones are blocking the light, because different elements of the periodic table have a different signature of which particular parts of the light they block out. And using that technique, because we can see things in the night sky, we can actually see what they're made of, which I think is amazing. I mean, a lot of people don't really seem to understand how astronomy works, and I certainly didn't until I started dating an amateur astronomer, and it sounds like quite a large part of it is due to that, and it's really quite an interesting thing. I think that's how they know what's there without actually having to go there. They can just look at it, and they can tell from the colour, essentially, from which colours are missing, what it's made up of, which I think is really neat. Evolution explains where the human race certainly came from. It doesn't explain where life came from, but you can see how we evolved from other apes, such as ourselves, because we are apes. We evolved from other apes who were around a long time beforehand, just as chimpanzees and bonobos did. And they evolved from other creatures, and you go back far enough, you go back to the little mouse-like creatures, and eventually you go back to fish, and we don't know what started off life, but we know that evolution explains how we got from very simple primitive life to the wondrous display we see now. And more than that, it shows us how every single life form on this planet is related in a small way to every other one. We're very, very, very distant cousins to, not just other apes, but also to every other animal, every other mammal, every other fish, every fungus, every germ, every tree, every life form on the planet. And to me, that's much more amazing than any kind of mystical things people can make up. As far as the mind-body duality goes versus materialism, we're now at the stage where we can observe people who say have been in a car crash and had a trauma to the head in a very specific place, a very acute trauma, and it can make a bit of their brain stop working. And how it works is it doesn't just make them generally a bit more stupid overall. They can still be very intelligent but lose one specific particular ability because their brain's compartmentalised into different sections. So, for example, when you're looking at things, the light hits your eye and the image gets flipped upside down and goes, through the different wiring and everything into your brain. A part of your brain works out, it makes up the image. Another part of your brain works out, here are things in the image, here's my friend Alice, here's my friend Bob, and, here's stuff we can ignore. And that sends it to a different part of the brain which says, Alice, I like Alice, I'm going to emotionally react to the fact that I can see her. And different parts of these brain can fail without the other parts breaking. For instance, you can have the ability to recognise people, but not the ability to emotionally react to them. Although the weird thing is you don't really necessarily understand why you're not emotionally reacting to them. So instead of thinking, a part of my brain is faulty and malfunctioning, you instead think, well, this, for instance, is my mother. I can see my mother, but I'm not feeling anything for her. I'm not feeling any emotions towards my mother. That's not right. But you don't make the leap to that's not right, therefore I'm in some way having faulty thinking. Instead, you make the link to, or rather the leap of logic to that's not really my mother, that's an impostor. This is imposter syndrome. That's just one of the many interesting ways in which the brain can essentially break or fail, but in a very specific way where most of it's functioning just fine, but very specific areas are failing. Also, drugs work. Drugs affect how people think, and not just recreational drugs, but in general. Estrogen and testosterone, for instance, do affect the way the mind works and the way you think. You can certainly ask that of any transsexual, and they should be able to tell you the difference between how their mind functions on one hormone versus another. Now, if the brain is generating the abstract concept of a mind and a personality, this is exactly what we would expect to see. We can see the compartmentalised parts of how the brain works, and we can see how things like traumatic injury and chemicals can affect the brain. This is exactly what we would expect to see. If mind-body dualism was true and there was a soul and an external force remote controlling the body, as in some kind of a Radiohead fashion, if you will, we wouldn't expect to see that. We might expect to see a degradation of the signal reaching the body, but we wouldn't expect to see such discrete breakdowns in how it works, and it wouldn't affect things in that way. It might affect your ability to receive your signal on what your body's supposed to do, but it wouldn't affect your personality. It wouldn't affect your ability to do all these very specific things, which is why it seems a bit kind of silly in this day and age, now that we have this knowledge at last, to actually still believe in things like souls. So although there still seems to be, for some reason, people arguing about religion versus science, and if they overlap or not, and if they argue or not, and to what extent religion's obsolete due to science, we can't say if there's any kind of supernatural, or if there's a soul, or if there's a God, but it's looking pretty bad for people who want to believe in those kinds of things. We now know, how vast the universe is, and how small and unimportant and insignificant we are in it. We now know how our brains work to a fairly respectable extent, nowhere near as much as we're going to over the forthcoming decades, as neurosurgery and neuroscience really takes off. But we're starting to realise how our brain works, and there's nothing magic or special about it. It's just a really cool, amazing system, just like any other, but a really advanced, cool one. We don't know where life comes from, but we know how life gets from very simple, primitive life to the wonderful, complex, extraordinary life we see around you. The fact that tigers are evolving to be very good at eating antelope and chasing them, and antelope are evolving to be very good at running away from tigers. If some conscious creature had sat down and designed them, you wouldn't really expect them to be trying to make one good at eating the other and the other not good at getting eaten by the first. But if we were all evolving to find our own niche in the world, and each of us try and find a different way of basically stealing food from others without letting them steal it from us, this is exactly what you would expect to find. So, although we technically don't know if there's a soul or any gods or, say, fairies or anything of that ilk, it's pretty safe to say that we know some things that people don't really want to hear but kind of have to face. We kind of know that one day we're going to die and not live on, and you have to be okay with that. I know people don't want to hear it, but this is kind of the truth here, and you can't really be an adult until you know these things. One day you are going to die and the world will live on without you, because the other main thing is, you're not that important. Not just you, not just me, but everyone you've ever met. Our planet is tiny and insignificant, and the whole history of the human race and every other species on the planet is unimportant. Now, people don't want to hear these things, but that doesn't stop them being true. The thing that really winds me up about religious people is when they say that they're much more humble than atheists because there's a higher power. Well, the chances are the species out there in the universe on other planets which are much, much, much more sophisticated than we currently are, and quite possibly than we will ever be. We can be quite humble without having to think that some kind of benevolent father figure watches over us and cares about what we do, which in my opinion is kind of the opposite of being humble. You're kind of saying that you're really, really important again, which you have to grow out of that mindset, okay? So we're going to die, we're not important, and there's not really a meaning to life beyond eating and reproducing. This is not, a bad thing. This is nothing to get depressed about or be upset about or become a nihilist over. You shouldn't, you don't even need to become a hedonist over this one. We can still make up our own reasons to be happy and get out of bed in the morning and find out what drives us. Personally, I like making music, I like writing, I like programming. There's no reason for me to be upset to be living in such a wonderful, amazing world, which is so interesting, where people are daily finding out amazing new facts about how everything works. It's a wonderful age to be in. If you need wonder and excitement, go and see what CERN are up to. Go and see all the images coming from the Hubble Space Telescope. See what NASA are up to. We're finding out amazing things on a daily basis. Read up on what neurologists are saying, because that's a field which is really growing at the moment. We're finding out so many interesting facts. The world is much more interesting than all the stories people made up throughout the history of civilization up until this point. The truth is much more interesting than fiction. That's, the way it has to be, because fiction is stories that are designed by people to make sense and be simple to understand. Reality isn't like that. Reality is weird. Look at quantum physics. It's just crazy and bizarre. If you don't think it's interesting, you probably haven't understood it enough and read it enough, because it's just crazy. But that is how the world works, and truth is much more interesting than fiction. So if you need a reason for living, make one. Just find your passion, whether it's writing novels or composing music or finding out how the universe works or how any given part of it works. Make things, find out how things work. It's an amazing time to be in, and we really should constantly be grateful for how lucky we are to be living in this age, where thanks to science and technology we can live as long as we can, and we can find out as much as we can. It's really a wonderful time to be alive, and we should be thankful for it and happy and not making up all these silly fairy tales and believing in them, because the truth is not only, you know, worth caring about because it's true, but it's also more interesting. The world is much more interesting than what our tiny, puny imaginations can come up with. It's fascinating, and people should care about this. And this is why, you know, I think it's pretty certain that there are no souls, no fairies, no gods, no Zeus, no Thor, no Yahweh, and this is a good thing, and we should be really happy and excited by this. Not miserable, but excited. Okay, that's all I want to say on that issue.